what we should have left off was inside the users model, we should have finished off with this has secure password, right? We basically manually built out all the things that has secure password does for us, as well as the fact that this also builds in a validation. It will build in validates, and that's going to be the password digest column in your database. So if you try to create a user without a password, it'll actually kind of block that. So it does all of this for you. Let's take a look at that schema really quick. Boop, boop, boop. Oops. All right. So notice here that we're using something called password digest. Password digest is not coming from me necessarily. Where it's coming from is the docs on bcrypt. And what it's saying is that bcrypt will have digested the plain text password, the plain text string password, run it through that algorithm, and then it will spit out that hashified string. So if you want to take a look at it, bloop, 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 what we'll do is, we'll just do this. Get into the Rails C. We'll go into bcrypt. Okay, anytime you're ready. Cool, let's get into bcrypt. So it's a little tricky. You have to have B then capital C. Little password action dot create, and my password is like free is for me. And then you'll see this hashified string come up. Cool. So this is what the password digest is going to be. And what we want to do now is, because we have all of these methods, and we've finished part 1 which was authentication. Are you who you say you are? We now want to go into like the models, the user, and we want to actually do the authorization, which is going to be, are you allowed to kind of see, right? So let's do that. What we want to do is we want to naturally have some sort of login form, right? The idea here is this login logic is going to be very similar to the cart. If you remember the cart from the session, it had its own controller. It didn't necessarily go in application, since the logic for the cart goes in the cart controller. So here, all I did was I generated a sessions controller. This is a fairly common convention, and this is what it looks like. Obviously, it didn't have any code in it, but I'm just going to walk you through what that code looks like. Right? This new simply is going to just display that new HTML ERB, and that's going to give me the login form. Once I submit that form, I'm going to have a create action. In that create action, think about the params that are going to come through, right? Let's take a look. Man, I have way too many of these like Zoom things. All right, great. Localhost 3000 / users. I'm sorry. I think I made the route literally /login. Powerful. My name is Jeff, right? So when I do a / to login over here, let's take a look. How did it get this page? Well, let's think. It's going to be in the routes, so let's check the routes file. Man, it's taking a little bit. Or I could just, that was weird. There we go. Right, I do a get to /login, and I created these right here. Since I made that sessions controller, a lot of this code I kind of wrote out a little bit, since this is kind of like a Zoom recording. I'd love to help you out in person as you have questions, but I made a sessions controller. I have that new, which is just going to give me the login page, the create, which is going to create the session, which is going to create the fact that I'm now logged in and I'm going to be tracked somehow. Probably maybe like a session at a key of user ID, in the same way that we had session at a key of cart, to kind of keep track of the individual Nacho IDs, right? And then this logout is obviously going to be destroying that session. In the same way that we did with the cart, you're just gonna set it to nil, right? I'm just gonna pause here. If there's any questions, it's like what these routes do and how we kind of came up with them. Okay? Okay? Cool. All right, so if I do a get to /login, I'll see my sessions has a new. So back to my sessions controller, I'll see this new action. And then in that new action, I could see in my views, I'll have sessions and I'll have a new. And all this is just a login path, right? So far, so good. If you remember, right, what does this form do? This form tag will post to the login path. So I have a username and I have a password. So the params that come across are going to be username and password when I submit this form, right? So if I were to submit this form, and we'll take a look, and we put in some username, like my name is Jeff, and then a password. If you're curious as to how I created this, if you go back to this, you can have a password field tag, or you can have, a text field tag. Please, in your application, don't use like a text field tag. If you put like Mike Chang and then your password is a text field tag, it'll display terrible user experience, right? You want to use the password field tag. Bloop, bloop. And then that way it'll give you those dots here inside your password. If I were to hit login, remember the params that come across are going to be the username and the password. So let's utilize those params to kind of do some logic. In my sessions controller, it's going to hit the create action because the form will post to /login. And post to /login, if you remember, a post to /login is going to hit my sessions create. So in my sessions create, the first thing I have is my params username. What I'm going to do is actually find this user. The reason I want to use find versus find by is because if you remember, what happens if I use find on, say, a number or a key that does not exist inside my database, right? So if I were to like user.find and I were to say like, I don't know, 980 whatever, right? Like I don't have this many users, my website stinks, and I'm just not as cool as like Mark Zuckerberg. This will actually break on me and throw an error versus if I were to use find by and I were to use like ID, and then again, I were to put in an ID that didn't exist in my database, I would get nil back. So this is important because I want to be able to find by the username because that's what I have here. I don't have the ID. I don't have the params that come across. There's no like get to /sessions / like ID / like login. All right, so I don't have the params ID here. It did not come across on my params from the post from the form because the only thing that came across was my username and my password. So I can use a find by on the username, and what will happen is if that person exists in my database, then that @user becomes a user object. Otherwise, this becomes nil. This is going to be important because if you remember from the part 1 of this lecture, we have a method that has secure password built for us, and that is called .authenticate. This is an instance method. So let's take a look at the user's model. Ready? Boop, boop, boop. Here, right? And this authenticate will take in a plain text password, and then what it will do is it will create a bcrypt instance from the password digest, that hashified string that we did save in the database, which was better than the plain text, and we can use it to compare to see is it actually equal to that plain text password, right? So a super quick example is, let's see, I can simply do like, what's up, Vicky? Password equals to, right? I can create this whole thing. Oops, embarrassing. Great. So what I did was I just put password equals to bcrypt password.create. Free is for me. And it gave me this hashified string. What I could do is I can take in this password.new, and if I put in this hashified string, which is going to come from my database, which is going to be the .password digest, the self.password digest accessing its own attributes, and I compared it to, right, free is for me, this should return true, which means that this thing that I stored in my database does in fact match up to free is for me. So what I can do is with authenticate, if I pass in the plain text password, which I actually have, I'm getting from the params, right? When the user logs in from the form here, the params, they type in a password, I can run it against authenticate and see if it's true, then that means that person has the correct password and is in fact authenticated. The reason why I want to do something like this is because what happens if this user is nil and does not exist? Well, this would be nil, and then can you call nil.authenticate? No, it'll say like undefined method authenticate for nil class. So I want to check to see if that user exists first and if that authenticate passes. I can use this here because Ruby is very lazy. So let me show you something. Ready? What is true and true? Can you guys see this? I know I'm talking for a long time. Let me check to see the participants. Are you guys cool? Like, I can't actually see any of your faces. For whatever reason, you all turned off your video. Like, half of you turned off your video. Can you guys hear me? Do you understand where I'm going right now with this true? Okay, Diana, I see you. Jesse's cool. Cynthia's cool. Oh, cool. Victoria, Tali. Oh, DJ Khaled over there. I'll see you. All right, good deal. Nice. Smart, awesome. So Ruby's super lazy, and let me show you what I mean, right? If I have, let's see, Vicky, right? Did I define this variable or method? No. So if I put it, it's going to say, hey, there's undefined variable or method. If I put true and Vicky, what do you think will happen? Well, it'll give me this like error, right? First, it evaluates the left side, and this was true. If you see this AND operator, it means this whole statement must be true. Therefore, it will try and attempt to evaluate what this Vicky is. And if I do, what is false and false? Oops. All right? It's like super false. If I do true and false, what happens? It runs true, and then it sees false and returns false. Remember what happened when I put true and Vicky. Excuse me. If I do false and Vicky, do you think I will see this error? Well, let's find out. Bloop. False. So Ruby's super lazy. If it realizes that this first statement is false and it sees this and, which means that this whole thing must be true for it to be true, because this first half was false, Ruby will literally stop right here. It won't even bother evaluating Vicky because it already knows it's false and returns false. We could take advantage of that by checking to see, hey, did the user return something? Did I get a returned object from my database, or did I get nil? So by taking a look at this to see, hey, if this is nil, that will evaluate to falsy, right? In which case this will never run. So I'll never run into the error of @user.authenticate would be nil for nil class, because first it checks to see if the user exists. So this is a very cool shorthand instead of having to do something like a nested if statement. If I did like if @user.exists or something like that, and then I can do if @user.authenticate with the params password, blah, 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 then I can do this. Or I can shorten these two lines into this one super line. Cool? And so this is just the refactor I wanted to show you. The idea here is that if the user exists and they have authenticated, well, then it just makes sense to create the session for them. That means that they're now logged in. They're officially logged in. There's a session that exists, and that session at a key of user ID should be equal to that user's ID. Then we could just redirect to the user. That makes so much sense. Otherwise, right, I'm just going to put a notice here and say, hey, you didn't log in. Your username or password's trash. Sorry, redirect to the login path. All right, so far so good. Are there any questions? Just going to troll through the cameras here. You just like nod or shake your head or give me a quick slack shrug. Okay, be good. Was that a thumbs down? Oh my, yo, Jesse, what are you doing? Is that how you let people know you understand? You just hit them with one of these? Stop the madness. Stop the madness. All right, cool. All right, so we'll just move on. We'll move on. All right, so the next thing is, like, let's test to see what happens here, right? Boop, boop, boop. When I log in, man, let's create a new user. Let's create a new user, actually, because I don't remember what this password is. User's new. All right, Cool. I don't know. Vicky, you want to be a user in this?
Sure.
Cool. Vicky, what's your definitely not real password?
It's 12345.
Oof, what a secure password. 12345. Powerful. All right, when I hit create, what's going to happen? Oof, hey, look at this user show page. All right, it's Vicky. She's user number 8 over here. You can see it, user 8. And there's this like delete this account button, which totally makes sense, right? Let's take a look at what that user show page should look like. If I were to go to a different user, right? Say, I don't know, user 7. Should I be able to see user 7? Well, it kind of depends, right? Like how much of this is public, how much of this is private. But let's just go to user 7, see what happens. Look at this person. We have bangarang, and look, the delete button is gone. All right, let's go back to Vicky over here and see user 8. Boom, delete this account. How did we create this sort of functionality? Right? The idea is that only the person that's logged in, and if you are the logged in user and that session matches your user ID, then you should be able to see something, right? So like if I were to go to the user show page, I have something like this that's written. But you can easily do something like this, right? If the session at a key of user ID is equal to the @user ID, then I want the button to show. This is known as conditional rendering. And so it's very powerful because only if this session's user is equal to this current user show page, then I can display the information that I want to. And this is how you can determine what's public and what's private and who's authorized to see what. That make sense? Yeah, I'm gonna just, that was like a lot, so I'm gonna take a quick pause to see. Conditional rendering, like just literally an if statement in the middle of the show page. It's just Ruby. Yo, Jesse, you're awake, and that's awesome. It's cold. It's cold. Y'all good? It's not the same without the laughs. I feel like I'm just talking to a wall. All right. Okay. Cool. Everyone else's camera's off. For those that are cameras on, I could see you. Cool. Good deal. Let's move on. So the next part really is when I'm here, right? I have users 8. If I go to somewhere else, right, like user 4 or something, cool, method, nice. How do I know who's logged in right now? Like, where's the indicator that shows me that I'm currently logged in? Like, if I were to just accidentally go to /users, did I build the index page or am I too lazy? Ugh, I didn't build the index page. Womp womp. I don't know, let's go to users like 3. How do I know who's logged in right now? How can I possibly keep track of who is currently logged in? Yes, Jesse, that's what he looks like. Hey, take you to Flavor Town one more time. How can I see who's logged in? I need some sort of method. I need some sort of functionality where my app can figure out who is logged in right now. And so one of the things that we can do is we can use that user session, that key of ID, and try to figure it out. Remember, the session controller handles whether or not we build the session and whether or not the person's authenticated. My entire application needs to track who is logged in. So I'm going to put that logic inside the application controller. And that way all the other controllers can always run this method called current user and then just figure out who's currently logged in. So here's the application controller, right? I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I have a method called current user. All this is going to do is it's going to find by an ID with the session of user ID. Notice how I'm using find by here as well, because if I don't, and this possibly breaks, then my user will break my whole system. This right here will return either nil or a user object. That means that current user is either a user object or nil. And then I can have another method called logged in. This is important because I want to know whether or not someone is logged in, and I can determine if I can show them the right show page or if I should just redirect to logged in. Like if I want to lock down a part of my application and I don't want someone to see it, I need the application to know, is there somebody logged in right now? And if they are they even authorized to see it? So let me explain what this like double bang is, right? So remember, current user is either an object or nil. Let's learn a little bit more about Ruby. Cool. Let's do that. Hold on. Bloop, 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 bloop. This is embarrassing. All right, cool. So what we could do is we can see what is true, right? True is true. Powerful. What is not true? Should be false, right? So what is not true? True. I can take 7, and what is 7? 7 is 7. What is not 7? Should be false. So what is not 7? Oops, 8. Doesn't matter. It's true. So this is powerful because I can coerce, I can literally change and force any value into its Boolean. I'm going to pause right here and just kind of get a quick pulse check, like a thumbs up. If you can just even drop it in the chat like, hey, I'm alive. Alive, very confused. Nice. All right. Sorry, Adam. Adam's dead. DED. Dead. Yo, much love. Heart. Cool. All right. So I can coerce any value into its Boolean equivalent. All right. So if somebody is logged in, that must mean that there is or isn't a current user, right? And so here's where it gets kind of tricky. I have a method called authorize now, where basically what I want to do is I want to build that feature I talked about earlier. If nobody is logged in, I want them to log in first. So for example, like let's just say you're on Facebook, right? Can you look at a user's profile if you're not logged in? Not even your own, just anyone, even if they're public, right? It's no. No for Facebook. I think yes for Twitter, maybe yes for Instagram. But for Facebook, you have to be logged in. You have to have at least a bare minimum an account with 0 friends, 0 photos, and then you can finally look at public profiles, right? And so here's what we can do. I can create a method called authorized, and all it does is it redirects you to the login path unless you are logged in. So what that means is if there is a current user and somebody is actually logged in, there's a session for this person, then do nothing. But if there is not, if there is no one logged in, send them to the login path. That's all it means. So what I can do is in my application controller, I can do this. I can before action authorize. Remember, application controller is the main controller. Session inherits, users inherits, which means that in my application controller, if I call before action authorized, every single method in the entire application, everything in users, everything in sessions, everything and everywhere will run this method first. And so it will actually block me. Does that make sense? Yes. Eat. Oh my god. So literal. Yes, very good. Okay. Eat. So cool. That means that even if right now, let's save it. Ready? And what I want to do is I got to log out. How do I log out? Well, I'm just going to clear my cookies like a champ. Like this. Ready? Bloop. Clear those cookies, which means my session went away, which means that session at a key of user ID is nil. So if I were to go back to user 3, it should in fact redirect me to login. The problem is it redirects too many times. Why do you think this is happening? Well, let's think. Ready? If it's calling this before action authorized, what's happening is it's going to redirect unless you're logged in. Cool. Let's go to the login path. All right. The routes, the login path is this. Sessions new. Correct. It's a loop, right? The problem is even in sessions new, let's take a look at sessions new. What it's going to do is say, hey, I'm going to call and invoke authorized and redirect you to new. And the second it redirects you to new, guess what gets called? authorized, which means I'm not logged in and I redirect you right to the new. But you're trying to log in, but you have to be logged in to log in, which is crazy. So let's do this. Let's skip that before action of authorized when it comes to the new and create. That way, like any sane person, I don't have to be logged in to try to log into the application. Are there any questions on this, like skip before action authorize, what it's doing and why we need it? Cool. All right, so it's going to skip before that. And so in case you see something like this is obviously indicating that it's trying to redirect me to login a million times, but I have to be logged in to log in. But now that I'm using this skip before action, I no longer have to do it. So I can obviously type in a username and a password, and then it will actually hit create. Remember, I want to skip before logged in on the new and the create because I want to actually be able to create the session ID when I log in. So let's hit this over here, little Vicky action, and our password was 1234.
5.
Yeah, 12345. Very good. Hey, yeah, I'm gonna save that password. Cool. So now I'm just gonna walk over the logout and then walk over this delete. So, well, let's think. Logout should go where? Logout should probably hit the sessions controller and just delete the session. All right. So the first thing I want to check on my routes. Bloop, bloop. It hits. There should be some sort of delete to logout with the session destroy. Cool. Sessions. All right. Look at that. Def destroy. Bloop. All right. Oh, just kidding. Oh, just kidding. Just kidding. All right. I've got to get rid of this. Here we go. Bloop. Cool. It can either go inside the session, all right, with a key of delete. With a method of delete, deleting the user ID key. You can also go right into the session at a key of user ID and assign it straight to nil. This is going to be the same logic as we did with that shopping cart in order to clear out the shopping cart. So either one, dealer's choice, up to you. And then you want to like let somebody know like, oh, you logged out, right? Lols. Come back again next time. Possibly redirect to a login path, maybe redirect to a landing page, whatever you'd like to do. Cool. Any questions on that? It's weird seeing my own face stare back at me. You all right? Okay. Either way. So does the username dropdown happen automatically? No, this is from Chrome. Chrome will actually try to save anytime you like log in with like a new account. I'm not gonna like show you because my saved passwords are in there, but yeah, like you could try it. Yeah, sneaky Chrome, so sneaky, sneaky. How do you spell that? Sneaky. Cool. All right. Any other questions? You could just unmute and talk for a second. Awesome. I feel like I'm putting on like a 60-minute play. Thanks. Awesome. So let's go back to the show page, right? If current user, remember what the current user is. That's literally just the session, right? Current user. Oops, sorry, it's an application. It's just finding the user. So I'm just finding the user and calling .id and seeing if it's equal to the show page's user ID. This works with so many things. Let's say you wanted a nav bar, right? Where would you want to put a nav bar that every single page within your application would have? Well, if you remember from like intro to Rails, we should have went over something called the layouts, application.rb. So in the body, this is where your ERB tags are being yielded. You can have like, I don't know, like a button. Cool. Let's do this. A little button action. Let's close this button. And it could be cool beans, right? Let's take a look. I refresh. There it is. Cool beans on user 8. on user 4. What else? We have a login page. Login, cool beans. What you can do is you can use your conditional render here. If, right, I don't know, current user exists. Actually, this if statement, that looked like a Ruby. So if current user, then you can either yield this button or else, we don't want this to show. So we'll get rid of these, right? Else, whoa. Let's end that. I don't know, let's have a p tag that just says login please. No, login please, pray hands. Pray. What is it, prayer? Oh, there it is, money. Let's use this one, the generic one. Cool. So what I should see is this cool beans. However, if I were to go, I don't know, hit log out. Actually, let's log in with Vicky, and let's log out, and then now it's changed to login please. And it's just the conditional rendering. That way you can even think a little bit further. If your nav bar, right, maybe you want to put in, right, if you're logged in, this could be a link to the home page, to your show page, right? And so that's kind of the logic of conditional rendering. You could put it anywhere. Rails is just Ruby. So this is just an if statement. So I'm just going to stay on the line for a few minutes. If you do not have any questions, feel free to jump off the Zoom, but I will just be coming around following up to make sure to answer any questions, maybe in person, or to see if in your mind how you can implement it with your app if you have specific like models or anything. But if there's no questions, that's kind of really all I got in terms of like how login, how auth, how bcrypt, how password digest kind of all come together to create this like login experience. So I'm just gonna hang out for a few. But yeah, if there's nothing else, you can feel free to jump off. Oh. Very good. Claps. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it all comes down to what key you use, right? So if the user is authenticated, then do you have a specific attribute or a method to figure out who that person is, right? So here, right, at user, in your schema, do you have an attribute or a relationship that lets them know like who they are, right? Like if they're, whether or not they're like a plumber, so like at user.plumber, all right? Or I don't know if they're like electrician, right? So if the user is a plumber, then you can create a session with the key of plumber ID. And then you can use the plumber ID, check that anywhere you want. Or you could check to see if they're like electrician ID. Like it's just Ruby, where you want to handle that logic, how you want to create your session, and how you want to call that session can enable you to look at multiple layers of different types of authentication within an application. Exactly. All you have to do is just make a switch statement to see, hey, is this person an electrician or a plumber? And then render accordingly. So you can share a lot of view pages if you want to. Or you can just make separate view pages. It's up to you. Cool. Are there any other questions? All right. Feel free to just jump off once it hits down to like 1 or 2 people. I'm gonna kill it. But thanks for your time today. Bye.